Calvin was 41 years old, a certified home health aide with a salary of $49,000 a year, and at 2:17 in the morning, his world had shrunk to the size of a single room that smelled of antiseptic wipes and regret. The only light came from a dim $15 nightlight plugged into the wall, casting long, dancing shadows from the hulking shape of the rented hospital bed that dominated the small front room of their Baltimore row house. In the bed, Eleanor, his mother-in-law, groaned, a low, guttural sound that vibrated with pain and impatience. "Water," she rasped, her voice thin and brittle like old paper. Calvin was already moving. He'd learned to anticipate the needs that surfaced in the dark. His bare feet made no sound on the worn, 70-year-old hardwood floor. He picked up the plastic cup with the bent straw, its contents precisely measured and at room temperature, just as she liked it. His own body was a finely tuned instrument of someone else's care. He knew the exact angle to hold the cup, the gentle pressure needed to support her head, the soft words to murmur. He was good at this. It was his profession, after all. But this was different. This was not a job. There was no clocking out, no paycheck, no professional distance. This was a 4-year sentence served in increments of sleepless nights and thankless days. He held the straw to her lips. She took a few shallow sips, then turned her head away with a sharp, dismissive movement. A trickle of water escaped the corner of her mouth and ran down her chin. Calvin gently dabbed it away with the edge of the sheet. For a moment, her eyes, cloudy with cataracts and resentment, focused on him. The fluorescent glow from the street lamp outside filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating the deep lines etched around her mouth. "I never wanted you here," she whispered, the words slithering into the quiet room. They were not spoken in a moment of confused delirium. They were clear, cold, and deliberate. Each word was a perfectly polished stone dropped into the deep well of his exhaustion. Calvin froze, the plastic cup still in his hand. He had bathed this woman, changed her soiled linens, purified her food, and held her hand through fevers and night terrors. He had sacrificed his career, his friendships, and his own peace for her. He had done it for his wife, Renee, who had pleaded with him, her eyes full of tears, saying they couldn't afford a full-time facility. He had done it because he believed it was what a good husband, a good man, did. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. He placed the cup back on the small $80 metal bedside table, adjusted her thin blanket, and walked out of the room, the floorboards creaking under the weight of her words. In the hallway, he leaned his forehead against the cool plaster of the wall. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant siren wailing somewhere over in the Federal Hill neighborhood. His life was a collection of other people's sounds, other people's needs. He was a ghost in his own home, and he had no idea, not yet, that the woman he was caring for was not the one who had truly betrayed him. The real betrayal was sleeping soundly one floor above him, in their shared bed, dreaming of things he couldn't possibly imagine. Have you ever given every last piece of yourself to someone only to be told you were never wanted in the first place? Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt that kind of invisible pain, and we'll get through this story together. It hadn't always been like this. Before the illness, before the house on Patapsco Street became a makeshift hospice, there was a life that felt real. Calvin remembered their first apartment, a cramped one-bedroom in Hampton that cost them $950 a month. He was working at Johns Hopkins Bayview Medical Center then, pulling double shifts as an aide, his $30 navy blue scrubs, always smelling faintly of bleach. Renee was a teller at a local credit union, her smile a beacon of warmth that made the long hours worth it. Their life was built on small, carefully managed things. A 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it, Friday night pizza from a place on the avenue that cost $18.99 for a large pepperoni, and saving up for 3 months to buy a $600 flat-screen television. He remembered the day Renee brought up her mother. They were sitting on their worn, $400 IKEA sofa, a Baltimore Ravens game playing on the new TV. "Mama's getting worse, Cal," she'd said, her voice soft. "The doctor said the dementia is progressing. She can't be alone anymore." Eleanor was living in a senior apartment complex in Cherry Hill back then. Her pension and Social Security barely covered the $1,100 monthly rent and her growing medical bills. Calvin, ever the pragmatist, started looking up assisted living facilities. "We could find a place," he'd offered, pointing to a brochure for a facility that would cost $4,200 a month. "Maybe with her benefits and what we can pitch in." Renee had shaken her head, her beautiful, deep brown skin seeming to lose its luminous glow under the lamplight. Tears welled in her eyes. "Calvin, we can't afford that, and I can't put my mama in one of those places. You know how they are." She took his hand, her touch both desperate and deliberate. "You're so good at what you do. You have a gift. No stranger could care for her like you could. Like we could." The word "we" was the hook. He saw a future where they were a team, partners against the encroaching tide of illness. They found the row house on Patapsco, a 2-bedroom that was a step up from the apartment but still a tight fit, with a mortgage of $1,650 a month. They moved Eleanor into the front room downstairs so she wouldn't have to navigate the steep, narrow stairs. In the beginning, it was a partnership. Renee would handle the morning shift before she left for her new job as an administrative assistant at a large downtown church, a position that paid her $55,000 a year. She'd help Eleanor with her breakfast, lay out her medication. Calvin, who had switched to a part-time on-call schedule with a home health agency to have more flexibility, would take over for the rest of the day and night. The house filled with the paraphernalia of chronic illness: a walker, then a wheelchair, a commode chair that cost $120, boxes of adult diapers, cases of Ensure, and a dizzying array of prescription bottles that ran them nearly $300 a month after insurance. The smell of their home changed. The aroma of Renee's baked chicken was replaced by the sterile scent of rubbing alcohol and the faint, sweet odor of decay that clings to the unwell. Renee was full of praise in those early days. She'd come home from work, her arms full of groceries, and kiss him on the cheek. "You're a saint, Calvin. Look at her. Her skin looks good. She's clean. You're taking such good care of my mama." She would buy him little gifts, a new $45 polo shirt, his favorite brand of coffee. She made his sacrifice feel seen, valued. She would brag to her friends from church over the phone. "Calvin is just a blessing from God," he'd overhear her say from the kitchen. "I don't know what I'd do without him. He's a natural." He believed her. He believed in them. He had no idea that he was being played, that his compassion was being monetized. What he didn't know was that every act of service he performed was being meticulously logged and submitted, not as an act of love, but as a billable hour. The shift was subtle at first, a slow erosion of the "we" they had promised each other. It began about a year in. Eleanor's condition worsened. The dementia stole more of her memories, leaving behind a confused and often angry woman who no longer recognized the daughter who bustled around in the morning, but saw only the constant, quiet presence of the man who bathed her. Renee's morning shifts became shorter, more perfunctory. "I have an early meeting, baby," she'd say, already dressed in a sharp, $250 Ann Taylor suit, her $300 Kate Spade handbag slung over her shoulder. She'd give her mother a quick peck on the forehead, avoiding the real work, the difficult parts, the bedpans, the sponge baths, the patient coaxing to eat a few spoonfuls of oatmeal. That all fell to Calvin. Soon, he was the one getting Eleanor up, dressed, and fed every single day. Renee's involvement shrank to a brief hello when she left and a tired sigh when she returned. His part-time work dwindled to nothing. Agencies stopped calling when he turned down shifts for the third, then fourth time. "I have a family emergency," he'd explain, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. The emergency had become his life. His $49,000 salary became a memory, replaced by the slow drain of their joint savings account. Renee, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. Her career at the church was taking off. She was put in charge of fundraising, a role that came with a small raise and a lot more evening events. Her closet began to fill with new clothes, a $400 dress for the annual gala, a pair of $550 Stuart Weitzman shoes she said were an investment for work. "Appearance is important, Cal," she'd explain, turning in front of the full-length mirror. "People donate to people who look successful, who look blessed." Calvin, wearing a faded t-shirt and a pair of $20 sweatpants stained with something he didn't want to identify, would just nod. Bitterness was a weed growing in the back of his throat. He tried to talk to her one evening after he had finally gotten Eleanor to sleep. Rain lashed against the windows of the row house, a miserable, persistent drizzle. He found Renee in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, a glass of $25 Chardonnay in her hand. "We need to talk about the money, Renee," he started, his voice quiet. "My savings are gone. I haven't worked a paid shift in 6 months. We're falling behind on the gas and electric." She didn't look up from her phone. "The Lord will provide, Calvin. He always does." "The Lord isn't paying the BGE bill," he said, a bit more sharply than he intended. Her head snapped up, her eyes flashing with irritation. "What do you want from me, Calvin? I'm working 60 hours a week. I'm running a major capital campaign for the church. I'm exhausted when I get home. I can't be expected to do that all day and then come home and do this all night." She gestured vaguely towards the front room. The word "this" hung in the air between them, heavy and insulting. This was his life. This was the care he gave her mother. "I'm exhausted too, Renee. I haven't had a full night's sleep in 2 years. I haven't seen my friends. I haven't left this house for more than an hour at a time." She finally put her phone down and gave him her full attention, but there was no sympathy in her gaze. It was cold, appraising. "Mama needed a nurse, not a husband," she said, her voice flat. "This is what you're good at. Be honest. You were never ambitious. You were happy being an aide. I'm the one trying to build something for us, for our future. Someone has to." The cruelty of it winded him. She had reframed his sacrifice as a lack of ambition, his compassion as a professional skill he was simply exercising at home. He was no longer her partner, he was her employee, an unpaid contractor in the business of their lives, and she was the high-powered executive who didn't have time for the grunt work. He walked away without another word, the conversation over. He went to check on Eleanor. The sound of the rain, his only comfort. He had no idea how wrong he was. Renee was building something, but it wasn't for them. It was for her. The final devastating blow came not from his wife, but from his mother-in-law. It was a Tuesday morning, 10:42 a.m. He was helping Eleanor with her physical therapy exercises, a series of gentle leg lifts he'd learned in his training. It was a good day. She was lucid, calm. He was patiently moving her frail leg, his large, gentle hands supporting her knee and ankle. "You have good hands," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. A rare warmth bloomed in Calvin's chest. A compliment. It was the first kind word she'd said to him in months. "Thank you, Eleanor. You're doing great today. Really strong." She looked at him, her gaze sharpening, as if seeing him for the first time. She pulled her leg back, with a surprising amount of strength. "My Renee, she's smart," Eleanor said, a strange, cunning light in her eyes. "She found someone to do the dirty work for free." Calvin's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, Eleanor?" "She told me," the old woman continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She said she gets money from the government for taking care of me. A check, every month, for being a good daughter." She patted the mattress beside her. "She's a good daughter. Buys her mama nice things." She pointed a trembling finger at the new $350 television set Renee had installed in her room the week before. Calvin felt the blood drain from his face. A check? Money from the government? He knew about caregiver assistance programs. They were for people who had to quit their jobs to care for a family member. People like him. Not people like Renee, who was working more than ever. It had to be the dementia talking, a confusion, a misremembered conversation. It had to be. But the seed of doubt, planted by Renee's callousness and her sudden influx of cash, had just been watered, and it was beginning to grow, dark and poisonous, in the pit of his stomach. The discovery happened on a Thursday, at 6:47 a.m. The sky outside was the color of a bruise, threatening a storm that had been brewing for days. Calvin had been up since 4 when Eleanor had a bout of coughing that wouldn't stop. He had finally gotten her settled, her breathing eased by the humming, $200 nebulizer machine. He was bone-tired, a deep cellular exhaustion that felt permanent. He walked upstairs to their bedroom to grab his last clean pair of scrubs, a worn navy blue set that had cost him maybe $30 5 years ago. He had an on-call shift that afternoon, his first in weeks, a simple 4-hour companion care job for an elderly man in Roland Park. It would pay $88 before taxes. He needed the money. He needed to feel like himself again, just for a few hours. Renee was already gone. She'd left a note on her pillow. "Big fundraising breakfast with the bishop. Pray for me. Love, R." Her side of the bed was cold. The room smelled of her expensive $120 Chanel perfume. On her nightstand was a pile of mail she had brought in the night before and clearly forgotten about. Bills, junk mail, and a single official-looking envelope from the Maryland Department of Human Services. Calvin picked it up. His heart started a low, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. He knew this envelope. He had helped clients fill out the paperwork for these programs countless times. It was for the Caregiver Assistance Program. With trembling fingers, he tore it open. Inside was not an application or a notice. It was a check and a pay stub. The check was made out to Renee Jackson. The amount was for $1,844.50. The pay period covered the last month. He sank onto the edge of their bed, the cheap $800 mattress sagging under his weight. He looked at the stub. It detailed the payments. It listed the recipient of care, Eleanor Mays. And it listed the attending caregiver, the person whose hours were being reimbursed. The name on that line was his, Calvin Jackson. He felt a wave of nausea. He flipped the check over. There, on the endorsement line, was Renee's signature, a flourish of elegant, confident script. She had already signed it, ready to deposit it on her way to her big breakfast with the bishop. He looked around the room, his vision blurring. He saw her side of the closet, overflowing with clothes, a testament to her secret income. He saw the new $700 leather armchair in the corner she'd bought last month, saying it was a floor model, and she'd gotten a fantastic deal. And then he saw it, the final, brutal piece of the puzzle. The check was lying right next to the neat, folded pile of his laundry he had left on the dresser. It was resting on top of his scrubs. The symbol of his labor, his sacrifice, was being used as a coaster for the profits of her deception. The sight was so stark, so poetically cruel. that he couldn't even feel anger. All he felt was a profound, hollow emptiness. The rain finally broke, hammering against the roof, a torrential downpour that matched the storm inside him. He sat there for a long time, the check in his hand. The paper felt slick and cold. $1,844.50. He did the math in his head. 4 years. 48 months. He didn't know when the checks had started, but if they had been coming for even half that time, she had stolen tens of thousands of dollars. Money paid for his work. Money that could have paid their bills, fixed the leaking roof, or given him a single day of respite. He carefully folded the check and the pay stub and slid them into his wallet. He stood up and looked at himself in the mirror above the dresser. He saw a man who looked 10 years older than his 41 years. He saw dark circles under his eyes, a permanent slump in his shoulders. He saw a fool, a good, kind, trusting fool who had been played in the most intimate and vicious way possible. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. The exhaustion remained, but beneath it, a new feeling began to solidify. It was cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of glass. It was resolve. The time for being a saint was over. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Calvin's life. He moved through his days like an actor in a play, performing the part of the devoted husband and caregiver. But behind the mask of normalcy, he was a different man. He was a detective. He was a strategist. He was a man gathering evidence, piece by painful piece. His first act of playing dumb was that very evening. Renee came home buoyant from her breakfast meeting, chattering about the bishop's praise and the pledges she had secured. She was wearing a new silk blouse, a vibrant emerald green that probably cost at least $150. "Cal, you won't believe it! We raised almost $50,000 this morning," she exclaimed, dropping her heavy leather briefcase on the kitchen table. Calvin was stirring a pot of soup for Eleanor's dinner. He turned, a placid smile fixed on his face. "That's amazing, honey. You're doing such great work." He paused, then added with calculated innocence, "With that kind of money coming into the church, maybe you could ask for another raise. Things are still so tight around here." He watched her face. A flicker of something, annoyance, panic, crossed her features before being replaced by a practiced, weary sigh. "Oh, Calvin, it doesn't work like that. That money is for the new community center. It's not for me. We just have to keep trusting. And budgeting." She patted his arm condescendingly. "Don't worry your head about the finances. I've got it under control." "I know you do," he said, his voice smooth as silk. It was the first lie. It felt surprisingly easy. The next day, while Renee was at work, he began his real investigation. He remembered Eleanor's words, "She told me she gets money." He knew the state's program required meticulous documentation. The caregiver had to log their hours, detailing every task, from medication administration to bathing. The patient, or a designated representative, had to sign off on these logs. He had never seen these forms, which meant Renee had been forging his signature, or worse, having her own mother, in her states of confusion, sign them. He went to the shared desktop computer in their small upstairs office, a dusty machine they rarely used. He knew Renee's password. It was the name of her childhood pet. He logged into their online banking portal. They had a joint checking account where his meager earnings and her official salary were deposited. But he had always suspected she had another account. He did a quick search of her name and their address on the bank's website. And there it was, a second savings account, in her name only. His hands shook as he clicked on it. He couldn't see the balance without her specific login, but he could see the transaction history for deposits. A direct deposit. Every 2 weeks. From the MD depth of human SVCs. The amounts varied slightly, but they were always over $900. For the last 38 months, he pulled out a calculator. The total came to over $70,000. He felt the air leave his lungs. $70,000. He thought of the nights he'd stayed up, worried sick about the $800 BGE bill. He thought of the time their refrigerator broke and they'd had to buy a used one for $250 because they couldn't afford a new one. He thought of the faded, peeling paint in Eleanor's room he'd wanted to fix, but couldn't justify the $60 for a can of paint. He printed everything, every deposit record. He put the papers in a large manila envelope and hid it at the bottom of his toolbox in the damp, musty basement. The following Sunday was another scene in his silent play. He went to church with her. He hadn't been in months, too exhausted, too tethered to the house. But this time, he insisted. He sat in the pew, listening to the pastor preach about honesty and integrity. He watched Renee sitting in the front row, a pillar of the community. She lifted her hands in praise, her eyes closed in performative piety. During the offering, she placed a crisp $100 bill in the plate, a magnanimous gesture for all to see. Calvin put in a crumpled $5 bill, all the cash he had in his wallet. After the service, people flocked to her. "Sister Renee, what a blessing you are," said Deacon Miller, a large, jovial man. "That fundraiser was a triumph." Renee glowed, soaking in the adoration. She placed a hand on Calvin's arm. "I couldn't do it without my wonderful husband," she said, her voice dripping with false humility. "He is my rock. Holding down the fort at home with Mama, he's the real saint." The deacon beamed at Calvin. "A good man, taking care of family. The Lord sees your sacrifice, brother." Calvin just smiled and nodded. "She's the one with all the strength," he said, looking directly at his wife. He let his words hang in the air, a double meaning only he could understand. She thought it was a compliment. He knew it was an accusation. He was learning to speak in code, to live in the shadows of the truth, and he was becoming very good at it. Are you holding your breath, waiting for the moment this all comes out? Sometimes the quietest moments are the ones filled with the most tension. Let me know what you think Calvin should do next in the comments. The manila envelope in his toolbox grew thicker. Calvin knew the bank statements were damning, but he needed something more. He needed proof that he was the one providing the care, not just the name on a form. He needed the official records. Getting them required another level of strategic deceit. He waited for a weekday when Renee had an evening fundraising dinner. He knew she wouldn't be home until after 10. At 5:15 p.m., after he had fed Eleanor and settled her in front of the television to watch her favorite game show, he made the call. He found the number for the local Department of Human Services on their website. His heart pounded as the phone rang. A tired-sounding woman answered. "Human Services, how can I direct your call?" "Hello?" Calvin said, his voice steady. "My name is Calvin Jackson. I'm a registered caregiver with the In-Home Caregiver Assistance Program. I need to get copies of my submitted hour logs for my tax records." It was a plausible lie. "Okay, sir. I'll need the case number or the name of the care recipient." "Eleanor Mays," he said. He gave her Eleanor's date of birth and social security number, which he had memorized from her medical files. There was a clacking of keyboard keys. "Okay, Mr. Jackson, I see the file. It looks like the primary contact and payment recipient on this case is Renee Jackson. Is that your wife?" "Yes, it is," Calvin said smoothly. "She handles all the paperwork. She's the organized one." "Aren't we lucky to have them?" the woman said with a dry chuckle. "Okay, I see your name listed as the attending caregiver. We can mail the records to the address on file, but it can take up to 4 weeks. Or you can come pick them up in person at our downtown office. We're open until 6. Calvin looked at the clock. It was 5:25 p.m. The office was a 20-minute drive if traffic wasn't bad. He couldn't leave Eleanor alone for that long. He felt a surge of frustration. He was trapped, even now. Then he had an idea. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I'm actually with Mrs. Mays right now and I can't leave her. Is there any way you could possibly email them to me? It's for my accountant and he needs them by tomorrow." Another lie, layered on the first. The woman sighed. "We're not really supposed to do that. Privacy regulations, you know." Calvin played his final card. He let a wave of pure, unadulterated exhaustion seep into his voice. It wasn't hard to fake. "I understand completely. It's just, I haven't had a day off in a very long time. Getting downtown is difficult. Anything you could do would be a huge help." There was a pause. He could hear her tapping her pen on her desk. "You're listed on the forms as providing 24/7 care, is that right?" "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. Another pause. "Okay, honey, let me see what I can do. What's your email address?" He gave her the new, anonymous email address he had created the week before. 10 minutes later, a PDF landed in his inbox. It was 152 pages long. It contained every weekly timesheet submitted for the past 38 months. He opened the first page, and there it was. A detailed log of his life twisted into a lie. 6 a.m. patient assistance with bathing and dressing. 7 a.m. meal preparation. 9 a.m. medication administration. And at the bottom of each page, in the space for the caregiver's signature, was his name, clumsily forged in Renee's looping cursive. And next to it, in the space for the patient's verification, was a shaky, barely legible signature that was supposed to be Eleanor's. He printed every single page. The printer in their office whirred for nearly half an hour, spitting out the evidence of his wife's meticulous fraud. As the last page slid into the tray, he knew he had enough. It was time to find a lawyer. He found one through a legal aid society that offered services on a sliding scale. His first meeting was with a sharp, no-nonsense black woman named Elisa Warren. Her office was small and cluttered, located above a row of shops on North Charles Street. It cost him a consultation fee of $50, money he took from the emergency cash he kept hidden in a book. He laid everything out on her desk, the check he'd found, the bank statements, the 152 pages of forged time logs. He told her the whole story, his voice low and steady. He didn't let it shake with emotion. He presented it like a case file. Elisa listened intently, her expression unreadable. She picked up one of the forged timesheets, then one of the bank statements. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the deposit amount. So she was collecting state funds for being a full-time caregiver while maintaining a full-time job, and she was doing it by falsifying records to claim you were the one providing the care you were, in fact, providing for free. "Yes," Calvin said, "and she was depositing these funds, which total over $70,000, into a private account while claiming financial hardship to you." "Yes?" Elisa leaned back in her chair, a large, comfortable leather one that had seen better days. "Mr. Jackson," she said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face, "this is not just grounds for divorce. This is criminal fraud. This is theft. This is elder financial exploitation. The state of Maryland does not take kindly to this sort of thing." She picked up a pen. "Let's talk about our options, and let's talk about timing. The church's annual Women of Faith brunch is next month, isn't it? I hear your wife is the keynote speaker." Calvin felt a chill run down his spine. It was the first time in 4 years he felt like he had an ally. It was the first time he felt a glimmer of hope. The strike was planned with the precision of a military operation. Elisa Warren was a brilliant tactician. "A public accusation is messy," she'd explained in their third meeting, her office now feeling less like a stranger's space and more like a command center. A quiet, official inquiry in a public space. That's a surgical strike. It creates confusion, then panic. It isolates the target, and it makes her own people her jury. The target date was Saturday, June 12th. The annual Women of Faith brunch held in the banquet hall of Renee's church, a grand cavernous space with high ceilings and stained glass windows. Renee was not just the keynote speaker. She was the event's organizer and star. She had been consumed with it for weeks, her conversations full of seating charts, catering costs, and the importance of the new $600 cream-colored suit she'd had tailored for the occasion. On the morning of the brunch, Calvin went about his routine with a calm that felt almost unnatural. He got Eleanor up, bathed her, dressed her in a clean nightgown, and pured her favorite breakfast of peaches and cream. He was a man walking on a wire, the world a distant hum below him. Renee was a storm of nervous energy. "Calvin, does this suit look okay? Is it too much? The bishop's wife will be there." She preened in front of the hallway mirror. "You look beautiful, Renee," he said, his voice even. "You look like a leader." The compliment was genuine in a way. She was a leader of a life built on lies. "I have to go," she said, grabbing her oversized $800 Tory Burch tote bag. "The florist is meeting me there. I'll be home late. Don't wait up." She gave him a fleeting, airy kiss on the cheek and was out the door, the scent of her ambition and perfume lingering behind her. He had arranged for a respite caregiver from his old agency to come for the afternoon, a kind woman named Sarah, who arrived at 11:30 a.m. It cost him $120 for the 4-hour block, paid for with the last of his emergency money. It was the first time in years he had paid for help. The irony was not lost on him. At noon, he got into his old Toyota and drove to a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the church. He sat in a corner booth with a cup of black coffee he didn't drink. His phone was on the table in front of him. At 12:45 p.m., Elisa sent him a text. "We are in position." The plan was simple. Elisa had contacted the state's Office of the Inspector General, laying out the evidence of fraud. She hadn't filed a formal complaint yet. She had presented it as a potential case, asking for a preliminary investigator to look into a discrepancy. She had timed her call perfectly, ensuring the case would be assigned just days before the brunch, and she had very helpfully provided the investigator with Mrs. Jackson's public schedule, noting that she would be available for a brief, informal chat at the church event. The investigator was a man named Marcus Thorne. Elisa had described him as all business, no nonsense. He would not arrive with sirens or badges flashing. He would be a man in a simple, off-the-rack suit, holding a slim portfolio. At 1:05 p.m., just as Renee was scheduled to be taking the stage to give her keynote address, Calvin's phone buzzed again. It was a text from Elisa. "Showtime." He couldn't see it, but he could picture the scene with perfect clarity, pieced together from Renee's endless descriptions. The banquet hall, filled with 200 women in their Sunday best. The tables decorated with white linens and expensive floral centerpieces that cost $75 each. The air thick with the smell of catered food and collective faith. Renee standing at the podium, radiant in her cream suit, her face illuminated by the spotlight. Marcus Thorne would have entered quietly through a side door. He would have found the event host and asked, with quiet authority, for a word with Mrs. Renee Jackson regarding a confidential state matter. The host, flustered, would have approached the stage just as Renee was clearing her throat to begin her speech on living a life of purpose and integrity. The interruption would be a crack in the perfect facade. A man in a suit, whispering in her ear. The audience would murmur. Renee's smile, her public armor, would tighten. She would excuse herself from the podium, her voice a little too bright, promising to be right back. Thorne would lead her not to a private office, but to a small empty table near the back of the hall, still within sight of many of the guests. He would open his portfolio. He would not accuse. He would simply inquire. "Mrs. Jackson," he would begin, his voice too low for anyone else to hear, but his presence a beacon of officialdom. "My name is Marcus Thorne, from the Inspector General's office. We're just clearing up some administrative questions regarding the caregiver assistance file for your mother, Eleanor Mays." Her face, Calvin imagined, would go from confused to wary. "My mother? Is everything all right?" "I'm sure it is," Thorne would say, his tone disarmingly neutral. "We just have a payment discrepancy. Our records show that payments totaling over $70,000 have been issued to you over the last 3 years. However, the caregiver logs, signed by a Mr. Calvin Jackson, indicate he was the sole provider of services. We are required to follow up on any instance where the payment recipient is not the service provider. We just need to understand why the funds were not being transferred to Mr. Jackson for his work." And there it would be. The quiet, surgical question. There was no good answer. To admit Calvin worked for free would be to admit she took state money under false pretenses. To claim she paid him would be a lie easily disproven by his bank records. To claim he was a volunteer would be to admit to fraud. Calvin could picture her face perfectly, the blood draining away, leaving her luminous, like deep brown skin looking ashen under the fluorescent lights of the banquet hall, the confident posture crumbling, the smile gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He could imagine her stammering, her mind racing for a lie big enough to cover the chasm that had just opened up beneath her feet. But there were no lies left. The evidence was absolute. Her public triumph had just become the scene of her private execution. In the coffee shop, Calvin took a slow, deep sip of his now cold coffee. He felt no joy, no thrill of victory, just a quiet, profound sense of release. The wire he had been walking on for years had finally reached the other side. The aftermath was not a single, explosive event, but a cascade of quiet, devastating collapses. Renee never returned to the podium that day. She was seen leaving the church through a kitchen exit, her face pale, and her eyes wide with a terror that no one in her congregation had ever seen before. The whispers started almost immediately. The first consequence was social. The story, though not known in its full, sordid detail, spread through the church community like a virus. The official version was that there was a family emergency. But the sight of a woman of her stature being pulled from the stage by a man who looked like a government agent was too juicy a piece of gossip to ignore. Her phone, which had once buzzed constantly with calls from fellow committee members and admirers, went silent. Her invitations to social events stopped. She had built her identity on the foundation of public piety and respectability, and overnight, that foundation had turned to sand. Deacon Miller, who had once called her a blessing, now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah in the world she had worked so hard to conquer. The second consequence was professional. The church, an institution deeply concerned with its public image, could not abide by even the hint of financial scandal. 2 weeks after the brunch, she was called into a meeting with the bishop and the board of trustees. She was quietly, and without severance, asked to resign from her $58,000 a year position. The community center she had championed would be built, but her name would be nowhere near it. The third and most significant consequence was legal and financial. Marcus Thorne's quiet inquiry became a full-blown investigation. Armed with the evidence Elisa had provided, the state moved quickly. Renee was officially charged with felony fraud and theft. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the forged documents, the bank records, her own lies, she had no choice but to accept a plea deal. She avoided jail time, but the financial penalties were severe. She was ordered to pay back the full amount she had stolen, $72,318.50, to the state of Maryland, with interest. She was also hit with a $10,000 fine. Her private savings account was seized, its contents of just over $12,000 barely making a dent in what she owed. The court placed a lien on her future earnings. The life of luxury she had secretly funded was over. She was financially ruined. During this time, Calvin had moved out. He packed a single suitcase with his clothes, his worn scrubs, and the manila envelope of evidence, and left the house on Patapsco Street. He stayed on a friend's sofa for a few weeks before finding a small, clean one-bedroom apartment for $1,050 a month in a quieter part of the city. He filed for divorce. The legal proceedings were swift. With the fraud conviction as leverage, Elisa Warren negotiated a settlement that was brutally efficient. Renee, desperate to avoid any more public humiliation, agreed to everything. The house was to be sold immediately. After paying off the mortgage, the remaining equity, a little over $40,000, would go entirely to Calvin, considered a partial repayment for the years of unpaid labor and stolen funds. She was allowed to keep her car, a 3-year-old Lexus sedan, with a hefty $450 monthly payment she could no longer afford. Calvin kept the old Toyota. He didn't ask for alimony. He didn't want anything more from her. He just wanted to be free. He saw her one last time at the lawyer's office to sign the final papers. She looked smaller, diminished. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple dress. Her hair, usually styled immaculately, was pulled back in a simple, unadorned ponytail. She tried to speak to him, her voice a choked whisper. "Calvin, I'm so sorry." He looked at her, and for the first time he felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not love. Just a vast, empty space where those things used to be. "I know, Renee," he said, and he signed his name on the line, his signature clear and firm. And then he walked out, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices alone. He had his freedom, a small nest egg, and a future that was, for the first time in years, entirely his own. A year later, at 3:15 in the morning, Calvin was sitting in the driver's seat of a gleaming white van, the engine humming quietly. It wasn't new. It was a 2018 Ford Transit Connect that he had bought for $16,500, using a chunk of the money from the house sale. The van was his new beginning. The side was emblazoned with a simple, professional logo: Night Ride Transport, safe, reliable after-hours medical and senior transit. After the divorce, he had taken a few months to just breathe. He got a job with a high-end home care agency, and his reputation for being a calm, competent, and deeply compassionate caregiver quickly made him one of their most requested employees. He was making good money again, nearly $60,000 a year, but more importantly, he was reclaiming his sense of self-worth. He started noticing a gap in the system. Elderly patients, discharged from the hospital late at night, often had trouble getting home. Families were asleep, and standard rideshare services weren't equipped for wheelchairs or walkers. He saw a need, and for the first time, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a decade: ambition. He used his money to buy the van and have it professionally outfitted with a hydraulic wheelchair lift, which cost an additional $7,000, and safety restraints. He got the proper licenses and insurance. He built a simple website and had business cards printed. He started small, taking clients in the evenings after his day shift. Tonight was his first official night ride transport. He was parked outside the emergency room of MedStar Harbor Hospital. A few minutes later, the automatic doors slid open and a nurse pushed an elderly woman in a wheelchair out into the cool night air. She was a tiny black woman with luminous coffee-colored skin and a cloud of soft white hair, her belongings in a plastic bag on her lap. Calvin got out, a warm smile on his face. "Mrs. Gable? I'm Calvin, from Night Ride." The woman looked up at him, her eyes wary at first, then softening as she saw the kindness in his face. "It's so late. I didn't want to wake my daughter." "It's no trouble at all," Calvin said, his voice gentle. "That's what we're here for. Let's get you home." He expertly operated the lift, securing her wheelchair with practiced ease. The ride to her small, neat home in the Brooklyn neighborhood was quiet. He didn't press for conversation, just played some soft gospel music on the radio. When they arrived, he didn't just leave her at the curb. He wheeled her up her ramp, unlocked her door, and made sure she was safely inside, with a glass of water and her phone on her nightstand, before he left. Her daughter had paid online in advance, but as he was about to leave, Mrs. Gable pressed a folded $10 bill into his hand. "For your kindness," she whispered. He tried to refuse, but she insisted. Driving away, he looked at the $10 in his hand. It felt like more money than the $70,000 Renee had stolen. It was earned. It was a gift. It was a sign that he was on the right path. He doesn't see his ex-wife anymore. He heard through the grapevine that she works as a cashier now, that she sold her Lexus and lives in a small apartment. He doesn't feel joy at her downfall, but he understands it. He learned that true wealth isn't in a secret bank account or a fancy suit. It's in the quiet dignity of a job well done, in the gratitude of a stranger, in the peace of a man who knows his own worth. We think that strength is about holding on, but sometimes it's about letting go of the person who hurt you, of the life that was killing you, and of the pride that keeps you from starting over. True purpose is often found not in the grand gesture, but in the simple, humble act of helping someone get home safe in the middle of the night. What do you think is the most important part of rebuilding your life after a betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of resilience and hope